So hello, good morning. It's great to see so many of you who have been able to join We All Scotland's workshop this morning. I think there are still more people joining us, so come on in, and a very warm welcome to you all. Thanks for joining and giving us some of your time this morning. I know how busy everybody is right now, so we'll just make a start. And if I can ask everyone just to make sure that their microphones are switched off and to press mute, be wonderful. Thank you so much. So I'm Aileen MacLeod, and I'm the Interim Director at Wellbeing Economy Alliance Scotland. And I'm joined by two of my colleagues who I will ask just to introduce themselves. First of all, we have Lucas Bunze. Lucas.
Hi everyone. You can't see me right now, but I'm Lucas. I will be speaking in a little bit. I'm the Policy and Engagement Lead for the Wellbeing Economy Alliance in Scotland.
And then we also have Caris Scott as well.
I'm Caris. I'm the Campaigns and Communications Lead, and I'll share a bit more about that later on as well.
Thanks both. And we're also delighted to be joined this morning by Louise Davies, who is our Head of Policy, Communications and Digital Engagement at Scottish International Development Alliance. So thank you very much, Louise, for joining us this morning as well. And just to kind of remind everybody, this workshop is being recorded. We've had a lot of interest from people and various organisations who would have liked to have joined us today, but they aren't able to do so, and they asked if we could share a recording with them. So if you don't want to be on the recording, then if you just switch off your cameras. Now, as many of you know, the Scottish Government launched a consultation last December on its proposed Wellbeing and Sustainable Development Bill, and is seeking views on it until the 14th of February when the consultation closes, so pretty much 2 weeks today. And the purpose of this morning's workshop is really just to help inform you about the proposed Wellbeing and Sustainable Development Bill and how you can get involved with it. So Scotland's International Development Alliance, Oxfam Scotland, Carnegie UK, ourselves at We All Scotland, and several other organisations representing the health, social care, environment and nature sectors, who are all interested in strengthening the national outcomes and furthering wellbeing and sustainable development, have also just produced some detailed guidance on the proposed bill. And this is intended to help you prepare your own response to the consultation. So if you haven't had a chance to have a look at it, then please do, because really it is a really useful document, and we will also be putting it up on the We All Scotland's website as well, so that you have access to it. Now, this morning we have an hour, and what we plan to do in that time is to give you a brief overview, firstly from me, on why we think this bill is important. I'll then hand over to Lucas, who will talk about some of the key elements of the bill and the points that we think are important when it comes to responding to the consultation. Then we'll hear from Louise from the Scottish International Development Alliance, who will set out why the international aspect of this bill is so important. And then we'll have Caris, who will outline some ways in which you can get involved. We should have plenty of time for any questions that you may have. You can either write your question in the chat or raise your hand, and you can also put your questions in the chat as we go through the presentations, and any thoughts, comments or views that you have, because it would be great to hear these as well. So first of all, I think in terms of the Scottish Government's consultation on its proposed Wellbeing and Sustainable Development Bill, this really presents, a key moment in Scotland's transition to a wellbeing economy, and it shifts the discussion now to the politics of delivery and implementation. And while some of the governing architecture already exists in Scotland, reflecting, the government's commitments and ambitions towards a wellbeing economy, in terms of, we have the national outcomes, we have a national performance framework, we have a wellbeing economy monitor to assess progress, and also with the Cabinet Secretary for a wellbeing economy. But progress towards a wellbeing economy is currently hampered by, the lack of clarity, the lack of clear definitions. We have all sorts of competing frameworks and goals, and it's pretty much a disjointed landscape. And the challenge is really, how do we bring all the different elements into play in a way that is joined up, that's coordinated and integrated into an actual wellbeing and sustainable development framework that not only ensures policy coherence and alignment around the principles, the goals and objectives of wellbeing and sustainable development, but which also crucially sets the policy direction. It sets the long-term priorities, and it drives those shifts in policy and practice that are urgently required to support the delivery and implementation of a wellbeing economy in Scotland. And that's, in a sense, what this bill is seeking to do and why it's so important. Because, legislating for a wellbeing and sustainable development bill could be a step change for Scotland's wellbeing agenda. Next slide. And enshrining the principles of wellbeing and sustainable development could, if we shrine the principles in law, it could lead to wellbeing and sustainable development becoming the key drivers of public policy and practice in Scotland. And it could also create the transformational and long-term change that's urgently needed to address the root causes of the multiple social and environmental challenges that our societies face, and to protect people and their communities against these constant economic, social and political threats, and to move us out of this current cycle of crises that are stretching our social fabric to breaking point. So the bill is a hugely important opportunity because it would enable the government to create a clear and shared narrative of progress for Scotland and an overarching structure for decision-making and accountability, enabling our public bodies and other organisations to work together collaboratively and coherently toward that narrative. So in a sense, it will enable the government to provide clarity and guidance to how our public bodies and other organisations deliver, policy on the ground, enabling, effective government and societal actions to the challenges and crises that are impacting the well-being of current and future generations and our planet. Secondly, it would enable, well-being and sustainable development ways of working. It would embed them at the heart of decision-making in Scotland and ensure that there is a more coherent approach to domestic and international policy for sustainable development, so that all actions and decisions of government and public bodies are contributing to improving the well-being of all generations, both here in Scotland and elsewhere, as well as our environment. And I think, when it comes to, our national outcomes, which are obviously Scotland's delivery mechanism for our UN Sustainable Development Goals, the bill would also strengthen and improve their delivery in the National Performance Framework, enabling that framework to become Scotland's national wellbeing framework. And how these outcomes are actually being used, how they're being taken into account and reported on by the Scottish Government and public bodies, ensuring that they are much better linked into policy and spending decisions in Scotland. And it would also support a shift to more long-term and preventative policy making by also bringing a future generations lens into the policy process and the creation of an independent Future Generations Commissioner, whose role it would be to act as the guardian and champion of the wellbeing and sustainable development agenda for current and future generations, advancing and promoting it in Scotland, advising and supporting our public bodies and other organisations to work towards our wellbeing and sustainable development goals across their policy remits, monitoring progress and scrutinising policies and budgets to ensure that what they are doing is in service of the wellbeing of people and the planet, and also providing a visibility and some much needed accountability as well. Now, Scotland's debate is timely. Similar discussions are already underway at the EU and international level, where there is growing interest among policymakers and key stakeholders in how to apply sort of well-being and sustainable development policy frameworks and indicators, and how to embed that long-term sustainable development and future generations thinking into policy making. And in fact, the UN intends to appoint a special envoy for future generations and is committed to adopting a declaration on future generations that will be annexed to what is called a Pact for the Future that is set to be debated and agreed at its special summit of the future later this year. And in Brussels, there are also calls for the creation of a similar kind of Future Generations Commissioner in the next European Commission post the European elections. So I think Scotland, right now we are very well placed to be at the forefront of these global discussions and is one of the leading governments in the international network of the wellbeing economy governments that comprises Iceland, New Zealand, Wales, Finland, and also with Canada. I think there is a really, unique opportunity here for Scotland to become a genuine leader and to show, global leadership on wellbeing and sustainable development, to build on the success of the Wellbeing of Generations Act that was passed in Wales in 2015, that also created the world's first Future Generations Commissioner, and to go further in developing ambitious world-leading legislation. So this is, very much the start of the bill's consultation process, and we're looking forward to working with you all to influence and shape that legislation and strengthen it and ensure that it is as ambitious as it needs to be. And I'll hand over now to Lucas. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So in the next 5 to 10 minutes, I'm going to go over a little bit about the different elements of the bill, because as Elena said, it's quite a potentially big opportunity for Scotland. But it actually relies on quite a few different bits and ideas and concepts to work together, and that can be a bit confusing sometimes. So we made up this graphic to help us and you navigate that. But the key point, I think one of the key points to take away is really that to make this bill effective and to make this kind of decision-making structure effective, you need all of them. So you can't just leave one out or focus on one of them, because on their own, they're still a bit useful, but they're not going to work as well if we don't put in the kind of structure as a whole. And so basically you can, if you look at the graph, you can think about them in kind of the way we've laid them out. It's like you've got the two key concepts and definitions, which is collective well-being and sustainable development, which are a little bit, they're related and overlapping, but you can think about them a little bit as the collective well-being as the kind of what we're trying to achieve, and sustainable development a bit more about how we're trying to achieve them. Can you go back, please, Karis, actually? And then basically the rows underneath are about how do we actually operationalize that in practice and make sure that these kind of things happen and provide an accountability. So kind of from the top is from going from more conceptual to like more practical, and the different elements of the bill. And I'm going to briefly go through them. So so the definitions is the first one. So yeah, so basically that's the idea that these are kind of, in some ways, we define them as the overarching goal of what government should be trying to achieve, in the sense of creating kind of well-being, improving the well-being outcomes, but also doing that in a way that is just a sustainable development bit, which is about doing that in a way that reduces inequality, that doesn't threaten the well-being of future generations, and that takes into account impacts globally, not just in Scotland. And the text on the slides is not the definitions that we're proposing. There's more detail on that in the guidance, so you can have a look at it there. It's a bit more of a summary. But the idea really is that these definitions help to create that shared narrative that that Aileen was talking about. But it also defining these concepts clearly helps with accountability and achieving that. And the other important point is why it's especially these two concepts that we think are useful to put at the head of this and to define, is because they're both already used in legislation, and they're already used a lot in the rhetoric that the government uses and at the moment, but they're not clearly defined. That means defining them in legislation will make other pieces of legislation, such as the Climate Change Act and a few other ones, potentially more effective, because they already refer to these terms. So the next bit then is kind of about the, as I said, definitions are quite high level. So the question is then, how do we use them in practice, or how do we do that in practice? And in Scotland, on the well-being side, on the left-hand side, we've already got the national outcomes, which is essentially kind of our currently captured in the national performance framework, which set out the kind of Scotland we want to create. And they're essentially kind of describing what we want to do to improve our collective well-being. And it's great that we've already got them, but they're not particularly used particularly effectively, and they're also not developed very participatory. So in some ways they lack a bit of legitimacy at the moment. But in terms of conceptually, that's how we implement collective well-being, is through the national outcomes. But then the other side of that is like, if that's kind of what we're trying to achieve, then the putting in practice of the sustainable development is really that future generation lens. It's the idea that to embed a long-term perspective and focus on intergenerational inequality in all the aspects that we do. So essentially that is kind of taking the definition of the very high level concepts, taking it down one level into what it means in practice, and then how to really implement this in the bits that really come into the bill is then the next level down. And on a well-being, on the well-being side, that is legal duties on government and public bodies to promote the national outcomes. We've already got them at the moment, but there's generally, we know from evidence, but also from our own experience, that it's not particularly strong, and it's not actually, the national outcomes are not really a driver of driving policy decisions. But instead they're often more used to justify decisions after the fact. And they're also, as I said, not developed very participatory. So a very core aspect of the bill is therefore to strengthen those duties and make sure that that really the national outcomes become a driver of policymaking, but also that they are developed more participatory, and that they also strengthen reporting, so that the government have to report more regularly on progress towards them. But then again, it's not just about what we're trying to achieve in terms of the national outcomes, but it's also, I think, really important, given that this is quite a complex change and quite a complex system to navigate, that we help public bodies and set out some ways of working, which is some principles of how we expect people to go about implementing these duties and doing it in a way that is sustainable and in line with sustainable development. And that we've got a few ones in the guidance that we proposed, and that would be things like integration, so collaborating, working together across the public sector with other bodies to achieve these goals. It's a concept like long-term, so balancing the needs of today with those of future generations, is aspects as global citizenship, prevention, openness and transparency. So these kind of ways. And the idea is really to define those in high level in the bill, to make sure there's some coherence, and that essentially giving people a guide across Scotland on how they would be expected to work towards the national outcome and implement sustainable development. But then also, in addition to what is in the bill, obviously provide a lot more like guidance, toolkits, support that is not in legislation, kind of to help public bodies and other organizations implement these. And then finally, kind of the last piece of the puzzle, as Aileen mentioned, would be like the Future Generations Commissioner. And the idea behind that is that if we really want to make this effective, we're going to need some independent organization or institution that can scrutinize that the government and public bodies are kind of implementing and working towards the national outcomes and the sustainable development in a way that they're expected to, but also, just as importantly, help them do that in terms of, having a central place to provide, to develop resources, support, and these kind of things, to make sure that there's kind of things are linked up and there's that coherent approach that is, and to really bring that long-term long-term perspective to policy making, and really embedding that new ways of working. And these kind of things, it's quite an ambitious bill in a sense, really talking about changing the way we do policy across the board and the way we make decisions across the board. And that I said will require some investment in capacity to scrutinize and capacity to support and capacity to promote these ideas. And we think that the best way to do it is through a Future Generations Commissioner who has kind of got that mandate, but it will need some investment whatever way you do it, and there might be a few other ways that might be possible, and there's a bit more information on that in the guidance. But as I said, we think that the Future Generations Commissioner is the best way to do that. So the way I think, this is a quote from Sophie Howe, who was for 7 years the first Future Generations Commissioner in Wales, so she can describe it a lot better than me. But basically what she says, the role of the commissioner is to take a helicopter view, not necessarily getting into the nitty-gritty of problems emerging in the here and now, but offering a longer-term perspective. This is about joining the dots between issues and organizations, supporting and monitoring the application of a well-being lens. And at the moment, we haven't got an organization in Scotland who can take that longer-term perspective and who has the capacity to really, to really do these kind of things. So that's why some investment in that is quite important if you want to make this work. And I'll now hand over to Louise for the next bit.
Hi, thanks, Wheel, for giving me some time to speak today. I'm from Scotland's International Development Alliance, and we're the membership organisation for those who care about a fairer world. So our membership comprises of international NGOs, academia, public bodies, and individuals, mostly who work in global sustainable development or are interested in sustainable development. And I just wanted to talk today a bit about how a wellbeing and sustainable development bill could better support values of global citizenship and ensure that we're considering the impact of our decisions on those around the world. So I'll just talk a bit about why we think this matters, and then come on to some specifics around the consultation response. So it's clearer than ever before that our systems are not working for people or for planet. The pressing economic, social, and environmental challenges of our time mount every day. Scientists continue to warn of the imminent dangers of global heating, including severe loss of biodiversity. Soaring global food prices are threatening the world's most vulnerable with famine, whilst here in Scotland we face an unprecedented cost of living crisis. And as these global challenges mount with multiple intersecting crises, we really need to start understanding the connection between how our systems and decision-making here impact upon poverty, inequality, and the ecological and climate crises. We can't just see our consumption habits, our fossil fuel dependency, and our economic decisions in isolation from what happens elsewhere. But this doesn't happen routinely. Governments largely see their role in relation to domestic action, which can mean incoherent policies regarding global impact. So to support more joined-up policy making, policy development must consider not only the potential impacts in other policy areas, places, and into the future, but also ensure that as a whole, public policy is pro-ecological and pro-social in order to support the ability of people in Scotland and elsewhere to meet their needs now and in the future. And this is really policy coherence for sustainable development, which is something that CEDA has talked about for some time. So making sure that we're connecting our domestic and international priorities. We've been calling for a wellbeing and sustainable development bill for Scotland since 2020. And we believe that new legislation would help to ensure that the actions in Scotland contribute to the betterment of well-being, both here in Scotland and elsewhere, as we navigate out of these converging global crises. And by enshrining principles of sustainable development and well-being in law, we can ensure that they're considered in all policy decisions, whilst also giving clarity to how public bodies and other actors deliver policy on the ground to support a positive impact on the well-being of people and planet. Ahead of the 2021 Scottish election, CEDA and 70 other organisations challenged Holyrood's political parties to state their support for legislation that would explicitly prioritise wellbeing and sustainable development together, and many did so. And the Scottish Government then put this bill in their programme for government for 2021 to 22, with a commitment to place duties on public bodies to take account of the impact of their decisions on sustainable development here and globally. And the reason I wanted to speak today is because in the consultation paper that we've been presented with by the Scottish Government, that "and globally" aspect seems to have been lost. So I'm hoping that some of the people on the call here will be persuaded to follow some of our recommendations to get that reinstated in the legislation that gets put forward. We published a report in 2022 in partnership with Newcastle University, which was to contribute to the debate around this bill and how it could be implemented meaningfully. It doesn't cover everything, but there are recommendations in there which hopefully offer a way to give force and meaning to the commitments on wellbeing and sustainable development, whilst ensuring that the global impacts of activities in Scotland are considered not as an optional extra, but key both to what we want to achieve and how to do it, And some of those recommendations have been carried forward into the guidance for responding to the consultation. But whilst a lot of the recommendations and a lot of what you'll see in the consultation seems to be about systems, processes and duties, we also believe that the bill can generate a culture of continuous improvement in Scotland, one that encourages, nurtures and supports Scotland to make a progressively enhanced contribution to sustainable development at home and abroad. And this will bolster our credentials as a responsible global citizen and back up our ambitions with actions. Scotland prides itself on being a good global citizen, and politicians have made commitments to address pressing issues, including transitioning to a wellbeing economy, but we're not always clear on how to deliver the commitments. So this legislation is really necessary and could be groundbreaking when it comes to joined up action on building a sustainable future. However, much depends on how the terms are defined, and we think the proposals, our current proposals, are flawed. So the proposed definition for sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And this definition is taken from the Brundtland Report from 1987. And a lot of our thinking around sustainable development has moved on since then. We talk a lot about planetary boundaries. We're aware that there are limitations to the resources that we can access. We know that we want sustainable development that's equitable and fair. And we know it should consider those not just in Scotland, but around the world. And sustainable development doesn't just concern future generations, but also well-being and equity now in Scotland and globally. So any definition of sustainable development adopted in the bill should explicitly link present and future generations. So here's the definition that we've landed on in our guidance, that sustainable development is about the development of human societies based on fair shares of planetary boundaries, which equitably support the capability of present and future generations across the world to meet their needs. The proposals also do not reference policy coherence for sustainable development, which I mentioned earlier, and this is crucial if we want joined up policy making, which links global and domestic priorities alongside human and environmental well-being. So we've made recommendations in the guidance as to how that can be incorporated. And then lastly, regarding well-being, we need to consider whose well-being we're talking about. So the well-being in the bill is concerned with, again, not just future generations and not just people in Scotland. And that's reflected in the guidance that we've put together. So that's all I wanted to cover for now. Happy to take any questions, and I hope people will take on board some of our recommendations in their responses. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not going to speak for long. I just want to go over just a couple of ways that you can get involved and some things to keep an eye out for over the coming weeks and months as well. So first of all, just to reiterate, the consultation deadline is the 14th of February. And the guidance pack that the speakers have all referenced today, we will send out links to that and then either this afternoon or in the next couple of days, but it will be with you as soon as we can get that up on the website, and the recording of this presentation will come out as well, along with the slides and any key links that have been shared today as well. And we are going to be continuing our campaigning around this bill over the coming months as well as this goes through the process. And one of the things we're going to be doing with that is creating an open letter, and probably around about spring this year. If that's something you'd be interested in adding your name to, then be sure to sign up to our mailing list. You can do that on our website, which we'll share a link to as well. It's just right down the bottom of the homepage. There's a little form you can fill in, or feel free just to email me directly as well, and I can add you to that, and you can keep up to date. We'll also make sure that everything that we're doing is put out on our social media channels as well, so you can follow us on there to stay up to date with all of the latest. We will be doing some media work over the coming weeks as well as the consultation deadline approaches, and we'll be doing a series of blogs as well, kind of looking at different elements of the bill and why those are important. So do keep an eye out for all of that, and do sign up to the newsletter if you want to stay up to date with all of the latest that we're doing and how you can get involved with that.